just when you think you might have had a break from content on here, I've got another video for you. You poor souls. Well, I thought I would do a video for the international break. Just sort of assessing really where Sunderland are. And, we've played 9 games so far in the 24-25 championship season. And we've played 9 games. That's a fifth of the season, effectively. Because obviously 5 times 9 is 45. And I'm a really sad mathematician, basically. We haven't even played 10 games of the season yet. So I'm not really going to... I'm going to try hard not to suggest where I think we'll finish or anything like that. Because I still think it's way too early to tell. I suppose we want to realise this, we're 12 points above the bottom 3, which says quite a lot how burnt out I've been from the last few seasons with Sunderland. But I thought we'd just go back over the games very briefly and then sort of assess who I think the star performers are, and then maybe just sort of look ahead to the next batch of 6 games in the Championship when we're in between this international break and the November one. But yeah, so let's get cracking with it. So I think at the start of the season, I don't know what people think in the comments below, but I always got the impression that a lot of people, both Sunderland fans and non-Sunderland fans, for me, fell into the trap of, well, we finished 16th last year, so the squad can't be that good, so therefore we're not going to do well this year. And look, if you look at just how, and don't get me wrong, the second half of last season was utterly shambolic. It was atrocious. It was really, really bad. But having said all of those things, I still stand by what I've said in that this squad was much better than what 16th last season showed. And I think the main reason we finished there was mainly down to, well, let's face it, the Michael Beale factor. To a lesser degree, Mag Dodds as well, although I do think the Beale appointment did more damage than what we probably realised that it did, because I do believe Dodds when he said, look, we know Dodds shouldn't be a head coach now, but I do believe Dodds when he said something to the effect of, taking over from Beale as opposed to taking over from Mowbray was not remotely the same thing. And just because I think, well, it's probably right when you actually look at how poor the last dozen games of last season were. I do believe there probably was something in the Beale appointment, and although Beale's results probably weren't sackable, I would say, you still had a lot of crap in there. Basically, performance-wise, we still were not particularly good, and even the last win we had at home before this season, which was Plymouth, his last win, we deserved to win that day, but it was largely down to 2 screamers that we ended up beating Plymouth. So I think the performances definitely did take a dip. I still stand by my opinion, by the way, last season. I don't think getting rid of Mowbray was the problem. I think it was replacing him with Beale that was the issue. But the point, to bring it back to this season, the point was, I did say, with a competent coach, and Least on What the Folk podcast said it absolutely spot on. Coach correctly, this is a promotion challenging side. And I said, absolutely bang on. I think I fully agree with him. I think we've got a team that's capable of 100 times better than finishing 16th in the Championship. And so I think a lot of people, again, both Sunderland and non-Sunderland fans, really sort of made the mistake of assuming that we weren't going to do very well just because we ended last season poorly, because that's not always the case. If that was the case, then we wouldn't have finished as low as 16th last year, because the previous year we got 6th. So it just goes to show how football works. Now, if I was to assess the games themselves, if you look back at the first 9 games, I'll look on them very briefly, and I'll get into who I think our best performers have been so far this season. But if you look at Cardiff 0, Sunderland 2, for example, I think that was a game where, okay, Cardiff have started really poorly, but at the time we weren't to know that we were going to be that they were going to be as bad as they have been. And if you look at Cardiff, they had more of the territory and more of the possession, but Sunderland still created the better chances across the game and deserved to win it, in my opinion, because of that. Obviously, that was Jack Clarke's last goal for Sunderland, wasn't it? But I think that Cardiff, it was a good, solid start, and at the time there was a lot of optimism around Cardiff, so that was arguably probably the toughest time to play Cardiff in a sense. Then you look at Sunderland 4, Sheffield Wednesday 0, and I always refer back to this. I think that the mood coming out of the Stadium of Light from the Sheffield home game last season and this season, they're not even remotely in the same ballpark. They are not the same thing. At the home game against Sheffield last season, there was just a sheer relief, to be honest, that the season was finishing, and a more trepidation or apprehension about what was going to come in the summer, the months to follow. Now, whereas this season, yes, granted, obviously the scorelines helped when we lost 2-0 at home to them last year, and we stuffed them 4-0 at home this season. But you look at that, Sheffield home game, and you actually look at it and you say, well, Meander got 2, that was Clark's last game for Sunderland. Funny that I said that the end of last season, Sheffield at home would be Clark's last game, and it was just the following season, which was mental. Funny way of working out football sometimes. But Meander got 2 goals, then we got O'Nien with another goal, and Dennis Serkins scored. And you look at it, at that point, you're thinking 2 wins from 2, 6 goals scored, 0 conceded. And you think, oh, actually, there's quite a bit of encouragement going on here. But then obviously in between the Sheffield game and the next game, which was Sunderland 1, Burnley 0, you look at that and you say, well, the big thing that happened was Clark effectively got sold. Now, the Burnley game for me was a massive talking point of this season so far, and probably for me still the best performance and result, particularly when you look in the context of that was when Clark got sold effectively. And actually, that was the moment which probably made Rielly Mundle, really, because I put out on Twitter, I remember this, I was in the pub in town with my mate Paul before the game, and I saw that Mundle was in the starting lineup, and I basically said something put a tweet, I was saying something to the effect of, there you go Mundle, there's your chance mate, let's see what you do son. And to be fair, he took it really well. His finish was a Jack Clark-esque finish, rather. And him and Roberts tore Burnley to the shreds constantly. Now, I know Phil Smith from the Sunderland Echo, who I'm going to be mentioning a couple of times in this video, he did say that, and I do agree with him, there was an element of Burnley were in transition at the time, and they'd lost quite a few, they were losing quite a few players on the spot, which I do understand it, but there's a couple of points to caveat that. One, they still had Vitinho before he got sold, Brownhill, Rodriguez, Foster, Trafford, and the back four, minus Dara O'Shea, was the exact same back four as the one that beat Luton 4-1 and beat Cardiff 5-0. And I believe I'd looked at the lineups from those 2 games. Aside from Dara O'Shea, it's exactly the same defence. So I know obviously sometimes you can lose a few players in one go and that can make a difference. But that Burnley team that day, however disjointed, was still good enough quality-wise to get something from Sunderland. So I'm not going to let that take away how good Sunderland were that day. And if you want to look at it this way in terms of, we beat Burnley because of their injuries, all right then, a lot of teams beat us at the back end of last season because Jack Clark wasn't fit. It works both ways, doesn't it? So that day we fully deserved to beat Burnley, and Roberts and Mundle in particular were good. Mundle scored the winner, which was quite poetic. And actually, if you look at it, Jack Clark's sale, and I'll get onto that in a minute, but Jack Clark's sale obviously was the big talking point. Then you look after that, after the window had finished, and you look at Portsmouth 1, Sunderland 3, and that was, and by the way, I'm not counting the Preston Cup game as well, because that was just where, I know you can say, well, that proves our squad depth wasn't good enough, but again, a lot of the squad depth was thrown and just played, go and play alongside each other. And really, if you're going to have that, then you're not going to do as well if you're not going to have any first teamers around you. So, but as far as Portsmouth Sunderland concerned, the game was a weird one because the first 10-15 minutes we struggled to get a grip of the game in terms of our pressing, in terms of our fluidity, our transitions. But once we got ahead, albeit through an own goal, which was quite fortunate, but once we got ahead, we never really looked back, and from there we were comfortably the better side. And the only disappointment from this game is that we didn't set the clean sheet record when O'Nien basically scored an own goal. But either way, it was 4 wins from 4 at that point. We were on 12 points after the first 4 games, and you couldn't really have complained too much, could you? Then you look at the Plymouth 3, Sunderland 2 game, and this was probably, for me, the worst performance of the season. And I know some people say the first half an hour against Watford, but I think for me, first half this game, even though I did think we deserved to be in front at half time, we still weren't particularly great. And I think the second half, Plymouth really came at us and deserved to beat us. And I think in a large part it was because of complacency from our end. But to be fair though, you look at it, it was an own goal, a penalty, and a mistake from Pato that undid us and made us come away with nothing from the Plymouth game. But to be fair to Plymouth though, since beating Sunderland at home park, they've since beaten Luton and Blackburn. One was in the Premier League last year, and one's in the top 8 at the minute in the Championship. So Plymouth away is probably just a harder fixture than people maybe made it out to be. And Mundle obviously got 3 goals in 3 at that point, which was really, really encouraging to see. And the good thing and as much as I wanted to keep Jack Clark, and I'm not for 1 second dismissing the quality Jack Clark's got, because we all know the quality he does have. But having said all of that, with Jack Clark, him going meant there was 3 good things about it, potentially. The first one was that it got quite a sizable fee into the club, and I still maintain I think we should have got a few extra million, and Ipswich should have been willing to pay a few extra million for Jack Clark. But we got a big fee for him, which can be reinvested in other areas of the squad. 2, it gave Mundle the opportunity to shine, and I wouldn't have been surprised if that was part of the negotiations when he signed back in January, or January, February time, whenever it was, last January window, or last winter window, when basically they said something to the effect of, we know in 6 months' time, if we don't go up at that point, Jack Clark will probably be off. That's where your chance comes from Rielly Mundle, and that's where we say we believe in you to deliver. And so far, he has done. He's got 3 goals and an assist, if memory serves me right, so far in his first 7 games. Because you've got to remember, he didn't play the Cardiff or Sheff Wed games because Clark was still here at that point. So I think So that was the second thing for Mundle. And the third thing was, as good as Clark was, and I didn't want to get rid of him, and I'm not going to dismiss how good a player he was, last season, we had a non-sustainable game plan, in effect, of saying, right, well, we'll just pass to Clark, or just pass to Clark again, pass to him again, and hopefully Clark bailed us out of the woodwork every single time. And while Clark's very good, and I would have loved to have got the rest of the squad up to his level, without spunking loads and loads of money, that was never going to happen, really. So in that sense, Mundle coming in and the rest of the team starting to perform, it meant that we were starting to play more as a team and have more of a team dynamic than just relying on one really, really good player. And I still believe the squad we've got is still good on it in and of itself, or at least the starting 11 is, with a few other players involved. So, but from Mundle's point of view, we signed him for £2 million in January, and he's so far looking like he's going to be worth much more than that if he was to be sold at the minute. And bear in mind, he's still got potential to get better. I think if I remember rightly, at Spurs, I know Clark didn't come through their academy, but at the time Clark and Mundle were at Spurs together, Spurs rated Mundle higher than Clark, I think, which is just mad when you really think about it. Is Mundle a better... I've seen some people suggest Mundle's a better player than Clark. I think he's got potential to be, but I think it's way too early to say that, because I think Clark has had much more development under his belt, basically. This is probably his 3rd full season, really, since he started to really come onto the scene, because the last 2 seasons with Sunderland in the Championship, and then, of course, potentially in the Premier League this season with Ipswich. But Mundle has definitely got potential to be better, but I think it's too early to say that at the moment. But anyway, the good thing about after the Plymouth game was we bounced back. We bounced back with a win against Middlesbrough, a game where we didn't have much of the ball, and Borough, apart from the Tommy Conway header, didn't really do all that much. But I think it's just we restricted them really well, I like to think. So in that sense, Chris Rigg's back heel will obviously be the match winner, and because of how well we defended, we got a deserved win over Borough, in my opinion. And again, it's like what goes around from last season with Borough, with the Coburn and Greenwood somehow not getting sent off, and Daniel gets sent off because of bad language. Yeah, we maybe got a bit lucky with Trey Hume potentially not getting sent off, but again, it's like what they said to us last season: what goes around comes around. And so in that regard, it was really good to beat Middlesbrough, and that for me, behind Burnley, was the second best result of the season, because I think Middlesbrough have got a squad that's going to be right up there once they start finishing their chances off. But that was probably, I wouldn't have been surprised if that Sunderland game was the game where they created the least amount of chances, and that was due to how well we set up. And then obviously look at the next game, which was Watford away. Again, like Plymouth, we're lost because of a silly mistake at the end. But the difference is, the first half an hour of this game, we didn't start that great. But once they went 1-0 up, we started to not dominate so much, but dictate a lot of the play, and really started to look really good. Equalised at the start of the second half, and with an assist from Roberts. And very quickly, I'll say this for him: Roberts has been really, really good so far this season. He has started to deliver much more like the standard we know that Roberts is capable of. Last season, for me, hopefully will be an anomaly, in that we know Roberts was better than what 1 assist he got last season and didn't score. So he's obviously scored the penalty at Plymouth, and he's got something like 3 assists already, I believe it is. But he did well to get down the right byline and put a cross in. And Wilson Isidor, when Mayenda got injured, has took his chance up front, where he scores at the back post effectively. But it's a typical striker's movement, and it's really, really good to see that. Obviously, we know about Dan Neil's mistake for the penalty later on, but for me, the performance that day merited at least a point. But the good thing was, but again, like with Plymouth, we bounced back with the next 2 games, when we beat Derby 2-0, thanks to Joe Bellingham's stunner from range, and then another good striker's finish with Wilson Isidor with a Rielly Mundle assist. Really, really good to see. And then obviously with Leeds, which is probably for me the best team we played so far this season, we proved we can more than hold our own in patches. And even though we struggled at parts of the game, for me, we still got something out of the game. And that point against Leeds has kept us top as things stand. Obviously, as we're at the international break now. So yeah, it's been, so when you look back at the first 9 games, 19 points out of a possible 27, really, really, really good to see. And a good thing about Wilson Isidor in particular, I want to mention this. Wilson, for me, I'm someone that always believes a lot of people write players off too quickly. The biggest examples I can think of at the minute, without a substantial amount of game time, are the likes of Nazari Russian and Leo Yelda. I think that both of them need to be given a way more time consistently on the pitch before we can really properly judge whether they're any good. From what I've seen of Russian, I personally quite like him. I'm not going to say that he's definitely a good player, but I do think there is something in there for him to offer. But the reason I say that at the same time, though, is because Russian is not an outlet. Mayenda, as well as he started this season so far, is not an outlet. Hamia size-wise should be an outlet, but doesn't know how to use his body at this point in time. Burstow was, well, Burstow. And as far as Isidor's concerned, he's the first forward since Ross Stewart, really, that is an outlet and does offers an outlet up front. Even against Leeds, we saw that. Even though there was times he got crowded out by Leeds players and struggled, like, he was still proven to be an outlet, and I was really impressed with what I saw from Isidor. Again, I want to stress so far, because if I'm going to say that people write players off too quickly, I can't be a hypocrite the other way around and say a player is good after 2 games. I need to wait and see if Isidor does this over a whole season. But so far, there is reasons to be positive with him. And again, if you look at the goal he scored against Derby, it was a typical sort of striker's finish, wasn't it? So I guess I'm sort of moving on to star performers this season so far. And I think, obviously, let's get the obvious one. Rielly Mundle's one of probably the most obvious one to pick. He's our top scorer so far this season with 3 goals. He's got an assist to his name as well in 7 games. And I think the biggest thing for me why Rielly Mundle's one of our best players is because it's not just the fact that he's stepping in and is doing good numbers, but it's who he's had to replace. Clark to Mundle, we didn't know at the time. At the start of the season, and I'll hold my hands up here, at the start of the season I said I didn't think Mundle was ready. And mate, so far you're making me eat a big batch of humble pie. So keep going, mate. Keep going, my friend. Lovely to see. Mundle is really developed in terms of it. There's still elements of his game. He's still a little bit raw. He's less raw than he was, mind. I will say he's definitely improved on his rawness or lack of rawness now. There's times where his decision making is still raw, but again, that will come with experience. That will come with playing more. But every single one. But if you look at the finishes against Burnley and Plymouth in particular, they were probably Jack Clark-esque sort of goals, weren't they, in terms of the finish and strike? And I've been, like I said, with Mundle, that's a big burden to carry to replace Jack Clark's goals effectively. But the good thing now is we don't just seem to be relying on one player to get goals. You look at how Rigg's got a couple, O'Nine's got a couple, Meander's got a couple, Isidor's got a couple, Mundle's got 3 of them. So we're starting to get goals across the pitch, aren't we? And that's a really, really good sign to me. So I've been very impressed with Rielly Mundle. Another player who I think has been really, who's really having an unsung shout, is Joe Bellingham. I think Joe Bellingham has been practically a monster in the midfield for Sunderland this season. And I think it's really encouraging to see that because he's grown physically. I think his maturity's getting all the better for him. I think obviously last season when he got like 8 goal contributions in his first season of men's football, regularly playing in men's football anyway. He had a good season last year stats-wise, but I think he's now got past the burnout phase of being played all the time. And I think now he's going to get used to playing much, much more regularly. And yeah, look, obviously we want to see him get more numbers. Like if you look at the goal he scored against Derby, that's a case. That's a classic example of what we know Joe Bellingham's capable of. But so far, he has dominated a lot of the midfield for Sunderland, and I think that's a really impressive thing. Another player who stood out is Chris Rigg. Obviously, one of the biggest things was getting Chris Rigg tied down to a contract this summer. And you look at just the quality he's got at 17, man. Like I said, he's not human. Whatever his mum and dad have for genetics, it's not a human race, I'm sure of it. But the thing with Chris Rigg is, we know that there's a good chance that I think it's a very, very good chance that he will leave next summer unless we get promoted. I've seen some Sunderland fans say that we won't keep him even if we go up, but I personally disagree with that. I don't see why Chris Rigg would leave if we go up. But the good thing with Joe Bellingham and Chris Rigg, the reason I mention them both together, Rigg came through the academy and Bellingham we signed for up to £3 million. Now imagine what they're probably both worth in the market now. And this again comes back to maybe the model works. Shock, gasp, horror. And if you look at like with Mundle with Clark, succession planning, and okay, it's maybe took a season longer than it should have done, but Isidor for Stewart, you're looking at it and you think, well, there's a lot of promise and upward and upsides to this squad potential-wise. And yeah, Patrick Roberts is another player who's done really, really well so far this season. Dennis Serkin's another one. There's a lot of players who, on the whole, have been really, really good. Even Dan Neil, who I think has struggled so far this season, I think he's still often a solid, steady 6 or 7 out of 10. It's just that a lot of the other players around him are performing 8s and 9s. But look, Dan Neil, compared to the standard we know he's capable of, hasn't done that great so far this season. But that doesn't change the fact for me he's a very, very good player. So I guess to sort of start to wrap the video up, because I realised I was going to intend this to be about 10 minutes. It's gone on for nearly 20. If you're still watching at this point, then fair play to you. If I was to assess the start of the season, I'll ask you, if you grade the start of the season out of 10, I'd say a strong 8, possibly a 9. But there's still a long, long way to go. We've still got, 37 games left to play. I think I will judge where we are in terms of the promotion picture at probably the next international break, because by that point we'll have played. We've got Hull away, Luton away, Oxford at home, QPR away, Preston away, and Coventry at home. So we've got 6 games coming up, sandwiched in between this international break and the next one in November, and that for me is a bigger mark of where we're going to be at. The last thing I will say is, Phil Smith said this after the Derby County victory, and I stand by it largely. I do believe this squad is more than good enough to finish in the top 6. I think that, yes, the league is very, very tight at the moment, but I've stood by it. This team is not crap. We have a lot of quality within the squad. We now seem to have a good head coach, a competent head coach, which I do stand by makes a massive difference. But I also think we've got something about us in terms of being able to balance both going forward and looking good going forward, but also balancing being good at the back. Now, at home, we've took 13 points out of a possible 15. Not going to complain at that. You cannot knock it. Away from home is where we need to start improving a little bit, because we've lost our last 2 away games. But even then, with Watford and Plymouth, we haven't been battered in either game, have we? And although I felt Plymouth deserved to beat us, you still could have got something out of that game, and probably should have got something out of that game, really. Watford, we definitely should have got something out of. So I think a good, solid 8 out of 10. I'd even go as far as say a 9. But the only reason I'm going to go with an 8 is because of how tight the league is. But you can't knock it. Top of the league is top of the league. Whether we're there come later on in the season remains to be seen. I've seen enough. I agree with Phil. I've seen enough to suggest we'll be top 6 contenders, top 2 contenders. Big ask. Time will tell on that one. But anyway, guys, I'll start to wrap it up here. The last thing I'll say, 4 of our next 5 are away from home. So let's see if we start to pick up more wins away from home. But anyway, guys, if you're watching the video, I'm trying to get to 6k subscribers. So if you're watching the video, you're not a regular subscriber, and you think I've earned it from you, hit the like button, subscribe, and share around. It'll be much appreciated. And yeah, what do you guys think? Have we made a good start of the season? Are we there to stay at the top of the championship? Are we going to fall off? How good is our squad? And can Rigg Labrise do it? And will this be the season we finally end our exile from the Premier League? Anyway, take care, you lovely lot. Enjoy the international break, or enjoy your Saturday, even though it's now starting to rain at the time of recording. And yeah, I'll see you guys all later for the next video. If it's not, unless anything happens, I'll see you at Hull next week.